Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Banjo-Kazooie. In the last part, we explored a bit more of Grunty's lair after finishing off Clanker's Cavern and did a good amount of Bubblegloop Swamp here in the process. And now we're gonna go finish it off and make steps towards our next world, Freezeezy Peak. So this up here is one of the few sections of the level I still have yet to explore, where this giant gator head is and where the fenced-in area is. This is, I think, technically speaking, the largest individual section of the level, and because of that, it's also the most spread apart with where notes are placed specifically in the swamp water, and it's always been kind of annoying for me to grab everything over here in the process because of that, because you need to potentially do upwards of 2 or 3 trips trying to use the wading boots over and over again. Now, thankfully, you don't need to use the boots to explore the entire area. Specifically, you just really needed to reach the far corner as well as some notes over by where the Croctus is. But you can reach the Croctus itself just by using the, I think they're meant to be like the cattail plant, reaching out of the water that look more like bones. Additionally, technically speaking, I guess the more efficient way to do this area might be to go up into the little fortress up on this hill and then jump down from there, but there's reasons you might not want to do that. Specifically, worth noting whenever there's a power-up like the wading boots or another power-up in this game or in Banjo-Tooie, if it's something you more find in a set area and equip rather than have natively, it has a timer that you hear through the music. You can specifically hear the ticking when the timer's almost up. Every single instance of that power-up has its own separate timer designed around the challenges that are nearby it. So while the wading boots around here might last long enough that you can maybe do a loop around where this log is over here with a golden feather on it, as well as where the blue Jinjo is, to get the notes that are at the swamp floor level, one that's up there near the fortress might have a short enough timer where that won't be very helpful. With that said, thankfully, pretty much every timer like that here in Banjo-Kazooie, at least, is strict enough where you have enough time to do the platforming puzzle or challenge in question, and then a little bit more on top of that. There's very few timers for power-ups in this game that feel cruel and absurdly strict. A couple more like that in my memory in Tooie, but it's been a while at this point. You see, my feelings on Banjo-Tooie are probably coming more into shape as we continue through this game as I compare the two. But it's also been a lot longer since I last played Tooie. I've played Kazooie every couple years since I first played it back in high school. I think I've at most played Tooie twice. I may have tried a third playthrough at some point, but I probably got like 2 or 3 worlds deep, saw that I reached like the specific water level in question, and just went, nah, I'm not strong enough right now. I have other things to worry about. Which, given that at the time frame, that would have been probably at most mid-college. Yeah, that tracks. Once we reach the platform down here, though, I'm gonna quickly do some speed up to get back towards where Tank Tup was, where we explored last time. As since we took care of the Croctus over here, the next and final one has spawned behind him to the left, so I figured I might as well get over there really quick just to finish that off. Worth noting, while largely every single world in Kazooie has a very efficient route you can find to get as much as you can through it in a very smooth order, the later in the game you get, the harder that gets to be because there's potentially a lot more back and forth between regions for switches you need to press and the like, let alone power-ups you might need to reach elsewhere, gates that you need to unlock via one way or another and the like. So while there is still an efficient route, it largely will either have more steps or a little bit more back and forth than, say, like Mumbo's Mountain and the like. Alright, at this point, let's go out of our way to go check out the fortress above this giant alligator head, as there's a couple of things we can get done up there. One of which, I won't lie, I often forget about until I'm right in front of it, because I think in my head it's just one of the least memorable Jiggies in the game. So I've been calling this a fortress, and it is definitely fortified, but worth noting, it's actively more of a maze that eventually puts you out over here near this window, where Mumbo's hut awaits for this world so we can do the transformation there. The maze itself is more just a giant singular hallway for the wading boots to get through. There's notes usually wherever there's a major turn and the like, and you do need to be a little bit weird with your turn radius in order to do so, because, compared to Talon Trot at least, the wading boots, due to their movement speed, have a bit of a wider turn radius, and you need to really keep that in mind if you're trying to do this smoothly. There are several wading boots along the way because there's effectively little breakpoints every, like, 3 or 4 turns, just about. The thing we're going to need to take a brief break for along the way, though, is the relatively forgettable Jiggy in this specific world. We're at about the 3/4 mark. There's going to be another switch to spawn a Jiggy in that you need to ground pound like the one we did earlier in this world last part. However, this one has a much stricter timer and a much smaller path to get to it, both in terms of the length of it and the width. You need to precisely make it over this small path to reach a Jiggy that spawns just over there. This is surprisingly tough to do because the timer that's very short at only about 10 seconds just barely gives you enough time to reach that if you try to walk it, and talon trotting and trying to get over that is perilous enough because of the speed at which you jump, where you might overshoot.
First you see it, now you don't. The fast one wins, the slow one won't.
So, on my second try, thankfully, this went a little bit better, but I've had playthroughs where this takes me like 5, 6, 7 tries, and getting back through that maze is just annoying at that point. It's annoying, but I tend to forget it exists compared to a lot of other Jiggies in the game, if only because it's one of the few times a world has you do the same thing twice for 2 distinct Jiggies like that. Because most of the time, while there's repeat Jiggies, say, between worlds, like the 5 Jinjos, a Mumbo transformation one, the Witch Switch, and the like, largely, every single world has you do something different, at least in aesthetic for a Jiggy in question, if you are still ultimately pressing a switch. Bubblegloop Swamp does that switch twice in this case, and it's just kind of weird. The only other instance I can really think of them doing something like that, outside of maybe the structure of what's going to be the 6th world we visit, is something in the 5th world we'll talk about later on. For Mumbo's transformation in this world, you need 10 Mumbo tokens, which is pretty easy to come by this point. It's actually why I'm glad they don't put Mumbo in every world, because it gives you time to really build up enough supplies for the next time you need to see him. Also, I do like that they actively give you ammo, even for abilities you don't really use in a world in question, because it really does help with restocking for the next major time you need it. The other worthwhile thing is that directly above the center in the top of the roof is where the second honeycomb piece is for this world. I say second despite being the first one we grabbed here, because I already mentioned where the first one was last time because I technically missed it until later in the recording. Wait, Mumbo need new boots. Only kidding. I don't trust you. So the transformation for Bubblegloop Swamp is this adorable little alligator body. It's low profile to the ground so we can sneak between certain cracks that we couldn't otherwise, such as the one just down here in the corner of this area, such as the one over by the Jinjos and the notes we saw over by where the Witch Switch was, as well as, if you paid attention, the nostrils of the giant gator head right here. We're gonna do what's in the gator head last, though, as if you're trying to get all the notes, it's just generally safer to do that last, for reasons I'll talk about when we get in there. With that said, worth noting, out of every transformation Mumbo puts us through in the game, this is the only one that actively has an attack, where if you press the B button, you do some bites forward, and you do move a little bit faster while you do so. Not too useful, but we are going to need to use it to get the final Jiggy here, just keep that in mind. While we're kind of meandering through the swamp water, though, let's talk about some more of the game's staff. In specific, the next thing we haven't talked about yet is more keyboard tappers, which are the basic level software engineers. There's 2 listed, Kieran Connell and Reese Lewis. This is actually Kieran Connell's first credit. They then were also on the team for Banjo-Tooie, Grabbed by the Ghoulies, they were on the software team, same with Perfect Dark Zero. Viva Pinata, they were on the main team, Jetpack Refueled, they were on management at that point. And they continued being on management all the way through to Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Their most recent credits are as a development lead on Crackdown 2, working on the platform stuff for Rare Replay, and they ported the original Prince of Persia to something called the BBC Micro, which I think is like a specific helping people learn computers initiative by the British Broadcasting Company or something like that. Reese Lewis, on the other hand, started on this. They were then a programmer for Galleon on the Xbox. They were on engineering for Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. They were on engineering for Donkey Kong Country Returns. Additional programming for Duke Nukem Forever. DKCR 3D, same deal. Tropical Freeze, they were in the special thanks. And then their most recent credits are on Star Ghost as a designer, as well as Project Cars 3 and Old Gods Rising as a programmer and QA tester.
I'm Mr. Vile, greediest croc of all. Play my game to win a prize. Press A to accept, or B to chicken out. The game is simple. Eat more red Yumblies than me. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go!
Welcome to one of the most annoying Jiggies in the game. Though not for nothing, round 1 here's pretty easy. You just gotta outpace with how many he eats here by dashing over there and biting them with the attack button like I mentioned already. As long as you either try to stay in front of him, notice where he's going, or go in a circle yourself, you're probably going to win this round pretty easily. With that said, you need to be careful because of how close the Yumblies get. It's very easy for either you or Mr. Vile to just take a sudden lead out of nowhere because there can be 3 or 4 next to each other. Now, if you're having trouble with this Jiggy, you might notice there's some invisible shoes up there at the very northern corner. That's a power-up from a later world, and you can wait until then to do this. In fact, it's actually the only time a transformation in this game can actively use a power-up. On my earliest playthroughs of this game, I largely did wait until I could use that power-up because I really was having trouble with this, but I've learned some strategies over the years to make it a little bit easier as we go through. With that said, there's also been playthroughs where I just don't feel like doing this Jiggy, so this is one like the 2 or 3 I just do not bother with.
You only win easy game. Now we play harder game. Eat reds, avoid yellow grumblies. They not ripe. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go.
Round 2 introduces the fold of the yellow grumblies, where if you eat one of them, for the moment at least, you're stunned for a few seconds and cannot move. The same technically does apply to Mr. Vile himself, I believe, but he's very good about not eating them. This is where my main strategy for round 2 as well as round 3 really comes into play, racing him to his objective. Whenever you see Mr. Vile heading a direction, follow him and try to eat the Yumblies he's going for before he gets to them. On top of that, you can also use him as a compass for where some may have popped up, because I did mention this during round 1. The Yumblies and Grumblies alike both just pop in and out of the holes across the field at random. In fact, there's times where a Yumbly might go back into a hole and immediately be followed back up with a Grumbly popping out of the same one, so you really need to be careful. Round 2 isn't too bad, especially if you do the thing I'm talking about where you just kind of follow Mr. Vile to his objective and eat it first. But this is where he can pull out some surprise from nowhere victories and cause you to lose if you're really not watchful. With that said, it's round 3 that's the nightmare.
Nah, lucky green wins. Must play a last game. Only eat what is shown on top of screen. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go.
So round 3 will put a Yumbly or a Grumbly at the top of the screen. Eating that one will give you points. Eating the other one will stun you like I mentioned with the Grumblies during the previous round. With that said, it changes which one it is every 10 seconds. Do this, you really want to keep an eye on the clock, as if you eat one of them when there's like, say, 41 seconds left and it goes down to 40 while you're mid-animation, there's times it'll count for you, there's times it'll count against you, really just depending on what exact time you actively press the button and got it into your mouth. Similarly to round 2, the best strategy here is to try and follow Mr. Vile around and see where he's going. But if you keep an eye on the clock, you can very easily take a lead here, because you might be heading for, say, 1 Grumbly, but there's 4 Yumblies nearby. If you even just hesitate a second for the timer to shift down to the next 10-second increment and for the goal to change, you can easily end up with a lead of like 4 or 5 points at a time very easily. Waiting for the power-up is still potentially recommendable because it does just speed you up for this that much, because Mr. Vile especially gets really fast here in the final round. But with enough practice and observation, you can be perfectly capable of doing this now.
Mr. Vile never lost before. Grady can have prize.
Worth noting, in the case you lose a round, you're not out of the game yet, but he will take a bite out of you, making you take some damage. On top of that, after you finish the main minigame, you can do it again against him with lives as your bet. And if you want to grind out some lives, this is technically an efficient way to do so, but there's enough lives plastered throughout the levels where you really never need to do that. With that said, because I'm playing this on the N64, my goal in this playthrough is to die as little as possible to keep my note score high. If I die at all, I hope it's either going to be early in the level or at the very end when I already have over 90 notes. Really quick, I did just leave as the Gator, but I actively went back into the level after I did the thing I'm doing with the Gator to come over back to Tip Tup's area, which he's no longer here to grab the second honeycomb piece. Bit of a weird transition there, I know, but it was really the best place I could think to fit it without kind of segmenting things even more weirdly. No matter what, though, you want to actively leave Bubblegloop as the alligator banjo, as there is something we can grab using that. And it's one of the more optional things in the game, even for 100%. Heck, I technically don't even take advantage of it. With Gator Banjo, we want to head back towards where the Freezeezy Peak puzzle was. As you might remember, when we were over there before entering Bubblegloop last time, there was also an ice block I used Kazooie to break. But the passageway breaking it opened was too small for normal Banjo and Kazooie. But it's the perfect size for this little baby alligator. So, with this, we can now go access one of the game's 3 main quote-unquote secrets. There's technically a couple of other secrets on top of that that are a very specific subset topic, but we'll talk more about that starting in the next world for reasons. Past this golden feather lies a small tunnel leading towards a floating book with eyeballs. Meet Cheeto. Cheeto, this spell book you have found. Magic cheats I have for you.
Hey, Book Brain, what did you say? You better not give my spells away.
Which lost book finders bear and bird are? Spell they get.
We sure do bag, lady. Come on, Book Boy, give us the spells.
Only one spell Cheeto can tell. Enter the code blue eggs on Sandcastle floor in Treasure Trove Cove world. Help you it will. Thanks, Mr. Cheeto. Hidden in Lair other spellbooks are. Them you should find. So, Cheeto will give you several cheat codes to put into the floor at Treasure Trove Cove that actively double your ammo capacity for certain items. For instance, that cheat will allow you to carry up to 200 blue eggs. And in a lot of my early playthroughs, I did take advantage of these. And I almost did for this playthrough, but I erred against doing it around the time I finished Clanker's Cavern because I decided, let's showcase how doable the game is without them. With that said, out of the 3 notable cheats like that you can find in the game, one of them is notably more useful than the others, if only because the item in question you can only carry so many of. That is a much lower total than the others. With that said, those aren't the only cheats you can do on the Treasure Trove Cove floor in the Sandcastle. To list off a few, there's the few we get from Cheeto that we'll see by name. There's some you can actually get from bottles by completing a puzzle minigame that he can give you after beating the game, where those have effects like big head mode for Banjo-Kazooie, large hands and feet, small body parts, and all that. The most interesting one of those is the final one, though, where with Mumbo, there's a small chance whenever you transform that he'll just turn you into a washing machine on accident, and it's a joke. He'll just turn you into the main transformation immediately after that. There's a code from that Bottles minigame, I think it's Wishy Washy Banjo, that turns you into a buffed version of that washing machine that can do things like go through the swamp water and similar substances without getting hurt and all that. And it has an attack even. The big trade-off is that it can't do things like use certain items or carry things like the gold for Blubber back at Treasure Trove Cove proper. There's what's known as the Stop-N-Swop cheats, but we'll, again, talk about that more when that comes more into play a little bit. But then there's the cheat codes, which are ones where you need to enter the word cheat and then input a very long string of letters, like cheat Banjo begs for plenty of eggs, which gives you infinite blue eggs. I believe those cheats in specific only work while you have the game open. If you save and quit, they will get disabled. And in specific, I think in the 360 release, they actively completely disable saving upon using them. But then there's the ones that are both really interesting and really dangerous. The ones that open note doors or worlds. For instance, one is like cheat, there's nowhere danker than in with Clanker. That'll open up Clanker's Cavern. You want to be dangerous with those types of cheats, though, because if you input more than 2 of them, be they 2 worlds, 2 note doors, or 1 of each, the 3rd one you enter will cause your save to get deleted. I think technically saving and quitting after 2 and then copying your save file will still save the copy, but the save file you enter the 3rd one on will just get deleted, so be careful of that. Either way, we went out of the way to spawn in a shock jump pad in the middle of the next section of Grunty's lair in order to jump into a pot, which allowed us to fall down the Grunty statue back in this room that opened up when we broke the witch switch back in Bubblegloop Swamp to get the 5th Jiggy here in Grunty's lair. That was a long run-on sentence. So worth noting about this area, this room with the pot and all that and the shock jump pad we just used is where the world after the next one is located. With that said, with the amount of notes we already have, you can head straight in this room we're entering to open a note door that contains that next world's painting and do that ahead of time. And what's interesting about that is they actively keep that in mind because these next 2 worlds are a bit of an anomaly. Notably, they each have a Jiggy that requires a power-up from the opposite. So I can only do 9 Jiggies in the upcoming world, but getting the power up from there will mean I can do all 10 in the next world after that at once. And then after I finish that world after that, I can come back here and grab the 10th. And the opposite is also true. This is going to be a little bit weird because it's the only world you can really do that in, but I do appreciate them doing it at least once so it can reward a little bit more exploration. With that said, this is a concept that Banjo-Tooie would take and run with to the worst degree. The amount of Jiggies that are tied to events in other worlds in Tooie kind of annoys me. I get the intent of why they did that, because from what I can tell, they really wanted to make 2E feel more like one large world rather than segmented off worlds like Kazooie here or Mario 64. But getting ahead of ourselves, I just think it feels kind of rough. Also, Grunty, you have a giant Banjo and Kazooie mural in your lair. Are you fans? I mean, I guess you maybe really like Diddy Kong Racing. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 7, we're going to tackle most of Freezeezy Peak. See you guys then.